I never thought my 20-year career at Henderson Financial would end with whispers in the break room and suspicious glances from colleagues I'd worked with for decades. But there I was, standing frozen outside the conference room door, hearing my name attached to words like theft and petty cash and investigation. The coffee mug in my hand felt suddenly heavy as I realized my entire professional reputation was crumbling based on lies. This story changed my life forever. If you want more stories like this, please subscribe and hit that like button. Where are you watching from? My name is Catherine Morgan. I'm 55 years old, and until 3 weeks ago, I thought I had job security that would carry me smoothly into retirement. I'd been the office manager at Henderson Financial since I was 35, watching the company grow from a small firm with 8 employees to a mid-sized operation with over 60 staff members. I knew every procedure, every filing system, every quirk of our outdated computer network. Most importantly, I managed the petty cash fund with meticulous precision, keeping detailed logs of every transaction down to the penny. But somehow, despite my spotless record, rumors were spreading like wildfire that I'd been skimming money from that very fund I'd protected so carefully. And I knew exactly who was behind it. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with the day's events replaying in my mind like a broken record. The house felt too quiet, too empty, as I stared at the stack of petty cash receipts I'd brought home to review for the 100th time. Every entry was documented, every withdrawal justified, every signature properly collected. Yet somehow, Janet Kellerman had managed to convince half the office that I was a thief. Janet had started at Henderson Financial 6 months ago as an assistant office manager, supposedly to help me transition toward retirement. She was 42, impeccably dressed, and came with glowing recommendations from her previous job in Chicago. During her first week, she'd made comments about updating our antiquated systems and bringing the office into the 21st century. I'd tried to be welcoming, even though her constant suggestions felt like criticism of methods that had worked perfectly for 2 decades. "You look like someone stole your lunch money," came a familiar voice from the kitchen doorway. My son, David Morgan, walked in, still wearing his EMT uniform from his shift at the hospital. At 31, he had his father's tall frame and my stubborn streak, plus an ability to read my moods that sometimes felt like a superpower. "Worse than that," I said, pushing the receipts away. "Someone's trying to convince people I stole everyone's lunch money." David poured himself a glass of water and sat across from me. "What do you mean?" I explained about the rumors, about Janet's subtle campaign to undermine my credibility, about the way conversations stopped when I walked into rooms. "She's been there 6 months, David. 6 months, and suddenly there are questions about discrepancies that don't exist. Have you talked to your supervisor about this? Mr. Henderson is in Florida for another 2 weeks. Janet's been very careful to time this while he's away. She's been working directly with his nephew Marcus, who's covering operations, and Marcus barely knows me despite working there for 3 years." David leaned forward, his expression serious. "Mom, this sounds calculated. What exactly is she saying?" "That's just it. She's not saying anything directly. It's all implications and concerned whispers. Yesterday she made a comment to Marcus about how the petty cash seemed to be running low more quickly than usual. This morning she mentioned to Sarah in accounting that she'd noticed some receipts looked irregular, but didn't want to make accusations." "That's clever," David said grimly. "She's letting other people draw their own conclusions." The next morning, I arrived at work 30 minutes early, hoping to catch up with Linda Santos before the office filled with people. Linda had been the receptionist at Henderson Financial for 12 years, and more importantly, she'd become one of my closest friends. If anyone would give me straight answers about what was being said, it would be her. I found Linda in the break room, setting up the coffee machine with the methodical precision of someone who'd performed the same task thousands of times. "Linda, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." She looked up, her kind face immediately showing concern. "Of course, Catherine. What's wrong?" "What are people saying about me and the petty cash fund?" Linda's shoulders sagged, and I knew the situation was worse than I'd feared. "Oh, honey, I was hoping you hadn't heard." "I've heard enough to know Janet's been spreading rumors. What I don't know is how bad it's gotten." Linda glanced toward the door, then moved closer. Yesterday, she showed Marcus a spreadsheet she'd created, comparing petty cash expenditures from the past 6 months to the same period last year. She made it look like there were significant discrepancies. My heart sank. "But I keep detailed records. Every transaction is documented." "I know that, and you know that. But Marcus doesn't know your system." When Janet presented her analysis, she made it sound like money was disappearing without proper documentation. What kind of discrepancies was she claiming? She said roughly $400 over 6 months. "But Catherine, here's the thing. I remember when we had that issue with the coffee service billing us incorrectly for 3 months. And the time the cleaning crew charged us twice for supplies? You fought those charges and got our money back. But Janet's spreadsheet doesn't account for any of that context." I felt a cold anger building in my chest. "She's manipulating the data." "Worse than that," Linda said quietly. "This morning, I overheard her telling Marcus that she was concerned about bringing this up because she didn't want to hurt someone so close to retirement. She made it sound like she was reluctantly exposing fraud out of duty to the company." The coffee machine finished brewing, filling the silence with its final gurgles. I stared at the familiar break room, the same beige walls I'd looked at for 20 years, the same motivational poster about teamwork that had been there so long it was part of the furniture. This was my workplace, my second home, and Janet was systematically poisoning it against me. "Linda, I need your help. I need to prove that her numbers are wrong, but more than that, I need to understand why she's doing this." "What do you mean?" "This isn't just about petty cash. This feels personal, like she's trying to push me out entirely." Linda nodded slowly. "Now that you mention it, she has been asking a lot of questions about your responsibilities. Last week, she wanted to know about your access to the main accounts, your relationships with our vendors, even your schedule and vacation time." Before I could respond, we heard footsteps in the hallway. Janet Kellerman appeared in the doorway, perfectly put together as always, with her blonde hair pulled back in a sleek bun, and her navy suit impeccably tailored. "Good morning, ladies," she said, with a bright smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Catherine, I'm so glad I ran into you. Marcus wanted me to ask if you could put together a summary of all petty cash transactions from the past year. He's working on some budget projections." The request sounded reasonable on the surface, but I could see the trap. She wanted me to compile the very information she'd already manipulated, knowing that any discrepancies between my records and her analysis would make me look either incompetent or dishonest. "Of course," I said evenly. "When does he need it?" "End of business today, if possible. I know it's short notice, but you know how thorough your record keeping is. It shouldn't take long." As she walked away, Linda and I exchanged glances. We both knew this was the next phase of whatever game Janet was playing. "Catherine," Linda whispered, "I think you're right. This isn't about the money at all." And that's when the pattern snapped into place. "Catherine," Linda whispered, "I think you're right. This isn't about the money at all." And that's when the pattern snapped into place. I waited, my hands gripping my coffee cup so tightly my knuckles had gone white. Yesterday, I was working late in the filing room when Janet came in. She didn't see me behind the tall cabinet. She was on her phone, and I heard her say something about accelerating the timeline and how she needed to clear out the dead weight before the quarterly review. Then she mentioned your name specifically, Catherine. She said you were too comfortable, and that comfortable employees were expensive employees. The break room suddenly felt smaller, the walls closing in. 20 years of dedicated service, and Janet saw me as dead weight. There's more, Linda continued. She was looking through personnel files she has no business accessing. When she left, I checked what she'd been looking at. Your file was on top, but underneath were 3 others. All employees over 50, all with good benefits packages, all with years of experience. I set my coffee down with shaking hands. She's not just targeting me. No, but you're first on her list. The rest of the morning crawled by. I tried to focus on compiling the petty cash records Janet had requested, but my mind kept wandering to darker possibilities. If she was willing to fabricate evidence about stolen money, what else might she do? Around noon, I called my daughter Sarah from my office, needing to hear a familiar, loving voice. Mom, you sound terrible. What's wrong? I found myself spilling everything. The accusations, the manipulated data, Linda's discoveries. Sarah listened without interrupting, the way she had since she was a child sharing playground troubles. Mom, this is serious. She's not just spreading gossip, she's building a case to get you fired. I know, but I don't know how to fight it. She's smart, Sarah. Smarter than I gave her credit for. Every move she makes looks reasonable on the surface. What about Dad? Have you told him? I hesitated. My husband Robert had always been my anchor, but lately he'd seemed distant, preoccupied with his own job stress. Not yet. You know how he gets when work problems follow me home. Mom, he loves you. He'll want to help. After hanging up, I stared at the stack of petty cash receipts on my desk. 20 years of meticulous record-keeping, and Janet was trying to twist it into evidence of theft. The injustice of it made my chest tight with suppressed rage. The afternoon brought an unexpected complication. Marcus called me into his office, and Janet was already there, seated primly in one of the chairs facing his desk. She'd positioned herself so that when I sat down, I had to partially turn my back to her to face Marcus directly. Catherine, Janet brought something to my attention that we need to discuss, Marcus began. His voice was carefully neutral, but I caught the apologetic look in his eyes. There seems to be a pattern of irregularities in the petty cash handling. Janet leaned forward slightly. I want to emphasize that I take no pleasure in bringing this up. Catherine has been with us for so long, and I have tremendous respect for her experience. The false concern in her voice made my stomach turn. She was performing sympathy while twisting the knife. What kind of irregularities? I asked, keeping my voice steady. Janet pulled out a folder. Well, there are several instances where cash was withdrawn, but the supporting receipts were submitted days later. And in some cases, the amounts don't quite match. That's normal processing, I said. Sometimes people forget to turn in receipts immediately, or they lose them and have to get duplicates from vendors. Of course, Janet said smoothly. But the frequency of these occurrences has increased significantly in the past 6 months. Marcus looked uncomfortable. Catherine, I'm not accusing you of anything. But Janet makes a valid point about tightening our procedures. Going forward, I think we need someone to double-check all petty cash transactions. Someone meaning Janet? I asked. It would be a natural extension of her current responsibilities, Marcus said. I could see the trap closing. Janet would now have oversight of my work, giving her even more opportunities to find or create problems. She was methodically stripping away my authority and reputation. That evening, I finally told Robert everything. We sat in our kitchen, the same kitchen where we'd shared 23 years of dinners and conversations, and I watched his face change as I explained what was happening. "She's what?" Robert's voice rose with indignation. "Catherine, this is harassment. You can't let her get away with this." "What choice do I have? She's clever, Robert. Everything she does has plausible deniability." Robert stood up and began pacing, his hands clenched into fists. 20 years you've given that company. 20 years of arriving early, staying late, never taking a sick day you didn't absolutely need. And this is how they repay you?" I'd expected him to be supportive, but the depth of his anger surprised me. Recently, he'd seemed so wrapped up in his own work problems that I'd felt like we were living parallel lives instead of sharing one. "I'm scared, Robert. Not just about losing my job, but about what comes next. I'm 58 years old. Who's going to hire me if I'm fired for theft?" He stopped pacing and pulled me into his arms. "We'll figure this out. Together. But first, you need to document everything. Every conversation, every accusation, every meeting. If she's targeting other employees too, maybe you can find allies." Sarah called that evening, as if she'd sensed I needed her. "How did the meeting go with your boss?" "Terrible. Janet's positioning herself to oversee all my work now. She's boxing me in." "Mom, listen to me. I've been thinking about this all day. What if the petty cash thing is just the beginning? If she's really trying to push out older employees, she might be breaking employment law." "Sarah, I can't afford to sue anybody, and even if I could, it would take years." "I'm not talking about suing. I'm talking about fighting back. But you need evidence, and you need to be smarter than she is." That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, Robert's steady breathing beside me. For the first time in months, I felt like we were on the same team again. The crisis was terrible, but it had reminded us that we were partners, not just roommates. But as I drifted toward sleep, one thought kept nagging at me. Janet had been so confident in that meeting with Marcus, so prepared. It was as if she knew exactly what his responses would be. And then it hit me. What if Marcus wasn't just an unwilling participant in this? What if... The next morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching my mood perfectly. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had long gone cold, staring at a legal pad where I'd started documenting everything Robert had suggested. The page remained mostly blank except for a few scattered dates and half-formed thoughts. Robert appeared in his bathrobe, hair still tousled from sleep. "How long have you been up?" "Since 4:30. I keep thinking about what you said, about documenting everything, but I don't know where to start. And Robert, I had another thought last night that's really bothering me." He poured himself coffee and sat across from me. "What kind of thought? What if Marcus isn't just being manipulated by Janet? What if he's actually working with her on this? She was so prepared yesterday, so confident. Like she knew exactly how he'd respond to everything." Robert's eyebrows shot up. "You think your boss is in on it?" "I don't know. Maybe I'm being paranoid, but 20 years I've worked for Marcus. 20 years? And yesterday he acted like I was already guilty. No benefit of the doubt. No, let's get to the bottom of this together. Just immediate acceptance that I might be stealing. Catherine, if that's true, then you're in even more danger than we thought." I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache building. I keep going over every interaction I've had with both of them in the past few months. Marcus has been distant, more formal. And Janet, she's been asking questions about procedures, about who has access to what. I thought she was just being thorough in her new role. She was gathering intelligence. Exactly, and I handed it to her on a silver platter because I was trying to be helpful. I laughed bitterly. God, I feel so stupid. Robert reached across the table and covered my hand with his. You feel stupid because you're a decent person who assumes other people are decent too. That's not a character flaw, Catherine. That's what makes you who you are. Before I could respond, my phone rang. Sarah's name appeared on the screen. Mom, I've been up half the night thinking about your situation. I need to ask you something, and I want you to really think about your answer. Okay, what is it? In the past 6 months, how many older employees have left your department or the company? I frowned, trying to recall. Well, there was Jim in accounting, but he retired. That was planned. And Martha in customer service, but she took early retirement to care for her mother. Were their retirements really voluntary, or did they feel pressured? The question hit me like a physical blow. Sarah, I don't know. I mean, Jim seemed happy enough, but Martha? She did seem stressed those last few weeks. She kept making comments about feeling unwelcome, about the company changing. What about their replacements? Younger, both of them significantly younger. The pieces were clicking into place, and I didn't like the picture they were forming. Mom, I think you need to consider that this might be bigger than just Janet targeting you personally. This might be a systematic effort to push out older, more expensive employees. Robert had moved closer, listening to my side of the conversation. I put the phone on speaker. Sarah, your mother thinks her boss might be involved too. That actually makes sense, Sarah replied. If this is company-wide, or even department-wide, someone higher up would have to be coordinating it, or at least turning a blind eye. I felt overwhelmed by the implications. So what am I supposed to do? If Marcus is involved, going to him with evidence won't help, and I can't exactly march into the CEO's office. No, but you can start building a case, document everything, like Dad suggested, but also try to reconnect with Jim and Martha. Find out what really happened to them. I haven't spoken to either of them since they left. Then maybe it's time to change that. And Mom, be extra careful at work. If they're moving this aggressively, they might be planning something else. After we hung up, Robert and I sat in silence for several minutes. The kitchen felt smaller somehow, as if the walls were closing in. I have to go to work, I finally said. I can't afford to give them any more ammunition by calling in sick. Are you sure that's wise? Sarah's right about being careful. Robert, I've been careful my whole career. I've followed every rule, exceeded every expectation, and look where it's gotten me. Maybe it's time to stop being so careful. What does that mean? I stood up, feeling something shift inside me, a resolve I hadn't felt in years. It means I'm going to start paying attention to things I've been too polite to notice before. It means I'm going to ask questions I've been too professional to ask. And it means I'm going to find out exactly what Janet and Marcus have been up to. Robert looked worried. Catherine, promise me you won't do anything reckless. I promise I won't do anything stupid. But I'm done being a victim. As I got ready for work, I felt a strange mixture of fear and anticipation. For months, I'd been reacting to Janet's moves, always one step behind. But Sarah was right about one thing. I needed to be smarter than Janet, and despite everything that was happening, I had one advantage she might not have considered. I'd been at this company for 20 years. I knew where all the bodies were buried. The question was whether I'd have the courage to start digging them up before Janet buried me alongside them. Walking into the office that morning felt like entering enemy territory. The familiar hallways seemed different now, charged with an undercurrent of suspicion and calculated malice. I kept my head high as I passed the break room where the petty cash incident had supposedly occurred, refusing to let my steps falter. Janet was already at her desk when I arrived, typing with unusual intensity. She looked up as I passed, offering that same saccharine smile that had once seemed merely annoying but now felt genuinely sinister. "Good morning, Catherine. How are you holding up?" The false concern in her voice made my stomach turn. "I'm fine, thank you." "That's good to hear. I know this whole situation must be so stressful for you." I stopped walking and turned to face her fully. For the first time in months, I really looked at Janet. Not the polite, distracted glance of a busy coworker, but the focused attention of someone trying to read an opponent. She was younger than me by at least 15 years, ambitious in a way that had always seemed admirable rather than threatening. But there was something in her eyes now, a calculating coldness that made me wonder how I'd missed it before. "What situation would that be, Janet?" Her smile flickered for just a moment. "Oh, the investigation and everything. It's just such an uncomfortable atmosphere for everyone. Especially for me, I imagine." "Well, yes. I can't imagine what it would feel like to have people questioning your integrity after so many years here." The comment hit its mark, but instead of retreating like I normally would have, I felt that new resolve Sarah had awakened in me. "You're right. It would be devastating to have someone deliberately trying to destroy a reputation that took decades to build." Janet's fingers had stopped moving on her keyboard. "I'm not sure what you mean." "I think you know exactly what I mean." We stared at each other for a long moment, and I saw something shift in her expression. The mask of concern slipped just enough for me to glimpse the person underneath. Someone who didn't like being challenged. Someone who was used to getting her way through manipulation rather than confrontation. "Catherine, I hope you're not suggesting that I'm not suggesting anything. Just making an observation about how devastating false accusations can be." I walked to my desk, feeling oddly energized. It wasn't much, but for the first time since this nightmare began, I'd stood my ground instead of shrinking away. Janet had expected me to crumble under the weight of her sympathy, but instead, I'd pushed back. The rest of the morning passed quietly, but I could feel Janet watching me. Every time I looked up, she seemed to be glancing in my direction, as if she was reassessing something. Good. Let her wonder what had changed. During lunch, I did something I hadn't done in months. Instead of eating at my desk, I went to the small park across from our building and called Robert. "How's it going?" he asked immediately. "Better than expected. I confronted Janet this morning." "Catherine, you promised you wouldn't do anything reckless." "I didn't. I just stopped pretending that we're friends. There's a difference." Robert sighed. "What did you say to her?" I told him about the conversation, and I could hear him processing it on the other end of the line. "You're right," he said finally. "That wasn't reckless. But be careful. If she really is behind this, you've just let her know that you're onto her." Maybe that's not such a bad thing. She's been operating under the assumption that I'm too naive to fight back. Now she knows better. "And what's your next move?" I looked back at the office building, its windows reflecting the afternoon sun like watchful eyes. "Tonight, I'm going to call Jim and Martha. Sarah was right about that too. I need to know what really happened to them." "Do you still have their numbers?" "Jim's, yes. Martha moved after her husband died, but Jim might know how to reach her." When I returned to the office, Janet was nowhere to be seen. Her desk was empty, her computer locked. I settled back into my work, but found myself paying attention to things I'd normally ignore. The way Marcus had closed his office door during what sounded like an intense phone conversation. The way the accounting department had gone unusually quiet whenever I passed by. The subtle shift in how some of my longtime colleagues interacted with me. It was like discovering that a song you'd been humming had a completely different melody than you'd thought. At 5 o'clock, I packed up my things and headed for the elevator. As the doors were closing, Janet appeared and slipped inside just before they shut completely. "Leaving right on time," she commented as we began our descent. "Yes, I have some calls to make tonight." "Oh, anything interesting?" I looked at her reflection in the polished elevator doors. "I'm planning to reconnect with some old friends, people I should have stayed in touch with." The elevator reached the ground floor and the doors opened. As I stepped out, I heard Janet behind me. "Catherine, some friendships are better left in the past. Sometimes reaching out just opens old wounds." I turned around, but she was already walking away, her heels clicking against the marble floor of the lobby. The threat had been delivered so casually, so conversationally, that someone overhearing might have thought we were discussing weekend plans. But the message was unmistakable. Stay away from Jim and Martha, or there would be consequences. That evening, I sat in my apartment staring at my phone, Jim's number pulled up on the screen. The weight of Janet's threat pressed down on me like humidity before a storm. My living room felt smaller than usual, the walls seeming to close in as I replayed her words in the elevator. The casual way she'd delivered that warning made it even more chilling. I pressed call before I could lose my nerve. "Catherine? My goodness, it's been what, 3 years?" Jim's voice was warm, genuinely pleased to hear from me. The relief I felt at that familiar tone nearly brought tears to my eyes. "Too long," I managed. "Jim, I know this is going to sound strange, but I need to ask you something about your last few months at Hartwell and Associates." The pause that followed stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed completely. "What's brought this up after all this time?" I told him everything. About the missing petty cash, the rumors, Janet's behavior, even her veiled threat in the elevator. As I spoke, I could hear him breathing heavily on the other end. "Catherine, you need to get out of there. Tonight, if possible." "What do you mean?" "The petty cash thing, that's exactly how it started with me. Small amounts at first, then larger ones. Janet made sure everyone knew money was going missing from accounts I managed. By the time I figured out what was happening, she'd built such a solid case against me that I couldn't fight it without destroying my reputation entirely." My hands were shaking now. "But why? What does she gain from this?" "Control. Power. Janet's been positioning herself as Marcus's right hand for years. Anyone she sees as competition gets eliminated. With me, it was theft allegations. With Martha, she spread rumors about drinking on the job and inappropriate relationships with clients." The room felt like it was spinning. "Martha never drank. She was one of the most professional people I've ever known." "Exactly. But Janet's good at what she does. She creates just enough doubt, plants just enough evidence that people start questioning what they thought they knew. Before long, the lie becomes the accepted truth." I sank deeper into my couch, the fabric rough against my palms as I gripped the cushions. "How did she frame you for the theft?" "She had access to the accounting system. Made it look like I'd been skimming client payments over months. Small amounts that wouldn't be noticed right away, but when they were all added up..." Jim's voice trailed off. "I couldn't prove I didn't do it. The evidence was all there in black and white." "Did you tell Marcus what you suspected?" "I tried, but Janet had been laying groundwork for months. subtle comments about my work quality, questions about my dedication to the company. By the time I realized what was happening, Marcus already saw me as a liability. My apartment felt suffocating now, the evening shadows creeping across my walls like fingers. I got up and paced to the window, looking down at the streetlights beginning to flicker on. Jim, I confronted her today. I basically told her I know what she's doing. Oh, Catherine. His voice was heavy with worry. That was dangerous. Now she knows she needs to accelerate whatever timeline she had planned. What do you mean? She'll move faster now, more aggressively. When I started asking questions, suddenly larger amounts went missing. Amounts that couldn't be ignored or explained away. She's probably already planning her next move. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass of the window. Below, the city moved on, oblivious to the small drama playing out in corporate offices and cramped apartments. People walking dogs, couples heading to dinner, lives continuing normally while mine felt like it was crumbling. There has to be something I can do. Some way to prove what she's doing. Not from the inside. She's too careful, too established. Your best bet is to start looking for another job immediately. Get out before she can complete whatever frame job she's setting up. But that means she wins. She gets to keep doing this to other people. Catherine, I know it's not fair, but sometimes survival has to come first. After I hung up with Jim, I called Robert back. His phone went straight to voicemail, which meant he was probably at dinner with Susan. I left a message asking him to call me back, then sat in my darkening apartment, feeling more alone than I had in years. The next morning, I arrived at work early, hoping to get a better sense of Janet's movements. The office was eerily quiet, just the hum of computers and the distant sound of traffic from the street below. I made coffee in the small kitchen, the familiar ritual providing some comfort. That's when I noticed the light on in Marcus's office. It was barely 7:30, and Marcus never arrived before 9. Through his partially open door, I could hear voices. Low, serious conversation. I moved closer, pretending to organize files at a nearby cabinet. Janet's voice drifted out, measured and concerned. I hate to bring this up again, Marcus, but I'm really worried about Catherine. Yesterday, she seemed almost paranoid, asking strange questions about our accounting procedures. And when I tried to help her understand the petty cash system, she became quite defensive. That doesn't sound like Catherine, Marcus replied, though I could hear uncertainty creeping into his voice. I know. It's so unlike her. That's what makes it concerning. I've been wondering if she might be dealing with some personal problems. Financial stress, maybe? Sometimes good people make poor choices when they're desperate. My blood turned to ice. She was doing it. Right now, in real time, I could hear Janet constructing the narrative that would destroy me. Each word carefully chosen, each concern expressed with just the right amount of reluctance and sympathy. I backed away from the door, my heart pounding so loudly I was afraid they might hear it. Back at my desk, I tried to focus on work, but every sound made me jump. Every footstep in the hallway could be Marcus coming to confront me. Every phone call could be security asking me to pack up my things. Around 10 o'clock, Janet emerged from Marcus's office. She walked past my desk with a small, satisfied smile. Good morning, Catherine. You look tired. Everything all right? The concern in her voice was perfect. Anyone overhearing would think she was being kind, checking on a colleague who seemed stressed, but I could see the calculation in her eyes. I'm fine, thank you. Well, if you need anything, you know I'm always here to help. As she walked away, I realized that Jim was right. Janet was accelerating her timeline, and I was running out of time to save myself. I spent the rest of the morning in a fog of anxiety, jumping every time Marcus's door opened, analyzing every glance from colleagues for signs that Janet's poison was spreading. By lunch, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed concrete evidence, something that would expose Janet's lies before she could solidify them in everyone's minds. The opportunity came when Janet left for her lunch break. I watched her gather her purse and head toward the elevator, chatting pleasantly with someone from accounting. The moment the elevator doors closed, I moved. Her desk was neat as always, everything organized in perfect little compartments. I felt sick doing it, but I started looking through her papers, searching for anything that might connect her to the missing money. Bank statements, receipts, anything that seemed out of place. That's when I found it, tucked inside a manila folder marked personal. A receipt from an expensive jewelry store downtown, dated just 3 days after the first discrepancy in the petty cash. The amount made my breath catch. $800 for a gold bracelet. My hands shook as I photographed the receipt with my phone. It wasn't definitive proof, but it was something. A purchase that seemed well beyond what Janet should be able to afford on her salary. Made right after money went missing. I was sliding the folder back into place when I heard footsteps in the hallway. Panic shot through me as I recognized Janet's voice, talking to someone as she returned early from lunch. I barely made it back to my desk before she rounded the corner, but my heart was hammering so hard I was sure she'd notice. She glanced at me, then at her desk, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Catherine, were you looking for something? I thought I saw you near my workspace." The question was casual, but there was steel underneath it. I forced myself to meet her eyes, hoping my voice wouldn't betray me. "I was just returning a file I borrowed yesterday, the Henderson project notes." Janet's smile was sharp. "Oh, but I keep all the Henderson materials in my locked drawer. I don't recall giving you anything to borrow." The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken accusations. I could feel other people in the office starting to notice the tension, heads turning in our direction. That's when Marcus appeared at his office door. "Catherine, could I see you for a moment?" My legs felt like lead as I walked toward Marcus's office. Behind me, I could feel Janet's eyes boring into my back, and I wondered if she somehow knew what I'd discovered. The receipt image burned in my phone like evidence of my own guilt rather than hers. Marcus closed the door behind me with a soft click that sounded final. His desk was covered with papers, and I caught sight of familiar petty cash reconciliation forms among them. My stomach dropped. "Catherine, I need to ask you some direct questions, and I hope you'll be honest with me." Marcus settled into his chair, his expression grave. "There have been some concerns raised about discrepancies in our petty cash fund." I forced myself to maintain eye contact. "What kind of concerns?" Janet brought some troubling information to my attention. She's been tracking the fund carefully, and there are several instances where withdrawals don't match the stated purposes. He picked up one of the forms. A withdrawal for office supplies that were never ordered, another for a client lunch that apparently never happened. The room felt smaller suddenly, airless. Janet had been more thorough than I'd realized, building a case, piece by piece. "Marcus, I can explain." "I hope you can." He leaned forward. "Because Janet also mentioned seeing you near the cash box on multiple occasions when you had no apparent business reason to be there. She's concerned but wanted to give you the benefit of the doubt." The manipulation was masterful. Janet had positioned herself as the reluctant whistleblower, forced to report suspicious behavior out of duty rather than malice. My mind raced, trying to find the right words to defend myself without sounding desperate. "Janet has been watching me very closely lately," I said carefully. "Almost obsessively. I think there might be more to this situation than what she's telling you." Marcus raised an eyebrow. Are you suggesting Janet is lying? I'm suggesting she might have her own reasons for deflecting attention from the missing money. I pulled out my phone, my hands trembling slightly. Marcus, I found something today. A receipt in Janet's desk for an expensive jewelry purchase, made right after the first discrepancy appeared. The words hung in the air between us. Marcus stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him processing not just what I'd said, but what it implied about my actions. You went through Janet's desk? His voice was carefully controlled. Heat flooded my cheeks. I was desperate. She's been systematically destroying my reputation, and I needed proof that she's not telling the truth. Catherine, regardless of what you may have found, searching through a colleague's personal belongings is completely inappropriate. Marcus rubbed his temples. This situation is becoming more complicated than I'd hoped. I showed him the photograph of the receipt. $800, Marcus. 3 days after money first went missing. Don't you think that's suspicious? Marcus studied the image on my phone screen. It's concerning, yes, but it's also circumstantial, and the way you obtained it creates a whole new set of problems. He sighed heavily. I'm going to need to involve HR in this matter. My heart sank. Once HR got involved, everything would become official, documented, potentially career-ending, regardless of the outcome. Marcus, please. Give me a chance to handle this first. Let me confront Janet directly, see if she'll admit what she's been doing. Absolutely not. This situation is already too volatile. Marcus stood up. I'm going to schedule a meeting with HR for tomorrow morning. In the meantime, I need both you and Janet to stay away from the petty cash fund entirely. When I left Marcus's office, Janet was waiting at her desk, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes alert. She watched me walk past, and I could practically see her calculating, trying to read what had happened behind Marcus's closed door. I made it to my desk and tried to focus on my work, but concentration was impossible. Every few minutes, I caught Janet glancing in my direction, and each look felt like another move in whatever game she was playing. Around 4 o'clock, Janet appeared at my desk with a cup of coffee and that familiar false smile. You look stressed, Catherine. Everything okay? The casual concern in her voice made my skin crawl. Just busy with the Morrison account. Oh, I'm sure that's it. Janet perched on the edge of my desk, uninvited. You know, I've been thinking about our conversation this morning, about the Henderson files. I realize I might have seemed a bit sharp with you. I looked up at her, trying to read the game behind her words. It's fine. I just worry sometimes. People under stress can make poor choices, act out of character. Her voice was soft, sympathetic, but there was something predatory in her eyes. If someone were having financial difficulties, for instance, they might be tempted to make decisions they'd normally never consider. The implication was clear. Janet was offering me an out, a way to confess to theft while she played the understanding colleague. It was almost tempting in its simplicity, except I knew it would destroy me completely. I appreciate your concern, I said evenly. But I'm managing just fine. Janet's smile flickered slightly. Of course you are. I just want you to know that if you ever need to talk, about anything at all, I'm here to listen. After she walked away, I sat staring at my computer screen, my mind spinning. Janet was escalating again, pushing harder, and I realized she must suspect that Marcus hadn't immediately acted on her accusations. She was trying to manipulate me into a confession before tomorrow's HR meeting. My phone buzzed with a text from David. How was your day? You seemed worried this morning? I started to type a reassuring response, then stopped. Maybe it was time to tell him what was really happening. But as I began composing the message, Janet walked past my desk again, and I saw her eyes flick toward my phone screen. Tomorrow's meeting with HR would determine everything. Janet had built her case carefully, positioning herself as the concerned colleague while painting me as the desperate thief. The receipt I'd found was evidence, but evidence obtained through my own wrongdoing. I needed a miracle, or by this time tomorrow, my career would be over. I deleted the text I'd started and slipped my phone into my bag. David deserved to know what was happening, but not here, where Janet could see every word I typed. The rest of the afternoon dragged by. I tried to immerse myself in spreadsheets and client reports, but my mind kept circling back to tomorrow's meeting. Every time someone walked past my desk, I tensed, expecting Marcus to appear with Janet at his side, ready to escort me out of the building. At 5:30, I finally gathered my things and headed home. The drive gave me time to think, and by the time I pulled into our driveway, I'd made a decision. David needed to know what was happening, not just because he was my husband, but because if Janet succeeded tomorrow, our entire life would change overnight. David was in the kitchen when I walked in, sleeves rolled up as he chopped vegetables for dinner. He looked up with a smile that faded when he saw my face. "Catherine, what's wrong?" I set my bag down and took a deep breath. "I need to tell you something, about work, about why I've been so distracted lately." He put down the knife and turned to face me fully. "Okay, what's going on?" The words came out in a rush once I started. I told him about the missing petty cash, about Janet's accusations, about finding the receipt in her desk. I watched his expression shift from concern to anger to disbelief. "She's trying to frame you?" David's voice was tight with controlled fury. "This woman is actually trying to destroy your career over what? Office politics?" "I think it's more than that. I think she wants my position, and she sees this as her way to get it." David ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I recognized from every major stress in our 15-year marriage. "And you have proof that she took the money?" "I have the receipt, but I took it from her desk without permission. It might not even matter in the meeting tomorrow." "Of course it matters. It proves she's lying." I wanted to share his certainty, but the day had worn me down. "David, what if they don't believe me? What if they think I planted it there somehow, or that I'm making this up to cover my own theft?" He crossed the kitchen and pulled me into his arms. "Then we'll figure it out together. You're not facing this alone." The relief of finally sharing the burden was overwhelming. I hadn't realized how much the secrecy had been weighing on me until it was gone. We were still holding each other when the front door opened, and my sister Emma called out, "Hope you don't mind. I used my key. I brought Chinese food." Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway carrying takeout bags, but stopped short when she saw our faces. "What's wrong?" "You both look like someone died." David and I exchanged a glance. Emma was family, and she'd proven herself trustworthy through every crisis we'd faced together. More than that, she had a sharp mind and often saw angles that escaped me. "Sit down," I said. "I need to fill you in on something." Emma listened without interruption as I explained the situation. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. "So let me get this straight," she finally said. "This Janet woman accuses you of theft, but you have evidence that she's the actual thief. The problem is you obtained that evidence by going through her desk." "Right, and the HR meeting is tomorrow morning." Emma leaned back in her chair. "You know, there might be a way to use this to your advantage. The receipt proves Janet had access to petty cash and was making personal purchases. Even if you can't use it directly because of how you found it, the information itself is valuable." "What do you mean?" "Well, If Janet really did buy that expensive skincare cream, she probably still has it. And if she's been taking money regularly, there might be other evidence. Bank deposits, other purchases, patterns in the missing money that correspond to her access. David nodded slowly. Emma's right. If you approach this strategically, you might be able to guide the investigation without revealing you went through her desk. But how? If I start throwing accusations back at Janet, it just looks like I'm deflecting. Emma smiled, and I recognized the expression from our childhood when she'd figured out how to get us out of trouble. You don't throw accusations, you ask questions. Innocent questions that a concerned employee might ask when trying to help solve the mystery. She outlined her thinking, and for the first time in days, I felt a spark of hope. It was risky, but it was better than walking into that meeting with no strategy at all. There's something else, Emma said after we'd talked through the plan. This Janet sounds like a sociopath. People like that don't stop with one victim. If she's willing to do this to you, she's probably done it before, or will do it again. The thought sent a chill through me. How many other colleagues had Janet targeted? How many careers had she damaged in her climb up the corporate ladder? My phone buzzed with a text message, and my blood ran cold when I saw Janet's name on the screen. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling slightly as I read Janet's message aloud. Looking forward to our meeting tomorrow. I hope you've prepared well. The casual menace in those words made my stomach churn. Emma leaned over to read the text, her jaw tightening. She's playing games with you? Emma said, her protective instincts flaring. This is exactly the kind of psychological manipulation I've seen before. She wants you rattled and off balance for tomorrow. David set down his coffee cup with more force than necessary. The nerve of this woman. She steals money, frames you for it, and then sends threatening texts like she's some kind of chess master. I watched my family rally around me, feeling a familiar warmth despite the circumstances. This was how it had always been with us. When one of us faced trouble, the other two automatically formed a protective circle. It reminded me of when we were kids and Emma had been bullied at school. David and I had spent hours strategizing ways to help her, just like they were doing for me now. You know what bothers me most? I said, setting my phone face down on the table. I keep second-guessing myself. What if I misunderstood something? What if there's an innocent explanation for that receipt? Emma reached across and covered my hand with hers. Stop, right there. This is what people like Janet count on, making their victims doubt their own instincts and perceptions. You saw what you saw. The receipt was real, the amount matched the missing money, and the timing fits. Emma's right, David added. You've always been careful with money, almost to a fault. Remember when we were teenagers and you kept detailed budgets for your babysitting earnings? You're not someone who would be careless with petty cash, let alone steal from it. The reminder of my younger self brought a small smile to my face. David was right. I had been obsessively organized about money since I was 14, partly because our parents had struggled financially when we were growing up. The idea that anyone who knew me well would believe I'd steal was almost laughable. But Janet doesn't know me well, I realized aloud. She picked me precisely because I'm quiet and don't make waves at work. She thought I'd be an easy target. Emma nodded approvingly. Exactly, and that's going to be her downfall. Because while she was busy underestimating you, she got sloppy about covering her tracks. We spent the next hour refining our strategy for the meeting. Emma suggested specific questions I could ask that would seem natural and helpful, rather than accusatory. David helped me practice staying calm and composed, drawing on his experience with difficult customers at his own job. As the evening wore on, I found myself studying my siblings' faces. remembering how we'd supported each other through various crises over the years. David's divorce 3 years ago, when he'd practically lived on this same couch while getting back on his feet. Emma's career change when she'd left her corporate job to start her own business, and we'd all worried about her taking such a big risk. "I don't tell you this enough," I said suddenly, "but I'm grateful for this, for having people who believe in me unconditionally." David's expression softened. "Hey, that's what family is for. Besides, you've done the same for us plenty of times. Remember when I was convinced my business was going to fail in the first year?" Emma asked. "You both talked me off the ledge at least a dozen times. You even helped me reorganize my entire client filing system when I was too overwhelmed to think straight." The memory made me laugh despite everything. "You had receipts stuffed in shoeboxes. It was like a paperwork explosion had hit your apartment. And you spent an entire weekend helping me sort through it all without complaining once," Emma said. "So don't think for a second that we wouldn't do everything possible to help you through this." My phone buzzed again, and all three of us tensed. But this time, it was just a notification from my banking app about my account balance. The interruption reminded me that in less than 12 hours, I'd be sitting across from Janet and whoever else would be in that meeting room, fighting for my reputation and my job. "What if the plan doesn't work?" I asked quietly. "What if she's covered her tracks better than we think? Or what if she turns this around on me somehow?" David and Emma exchanged a look, and I could see them having one of their silent sibling conversations. Finally, Emma spoke. "Then, we'll figure out the next step. This isn't going to end tomorrow, one way or another. If she gets away with this, she'll try it again, either with you or someone else. And when she does, she'll make a mistake we can actually use. But more importantly," David added, "you're not going into this alone. We'll be here when you get home tomorrow, ready to help with whatever comes next." As I looked at their determined faces, I felt something shift inside me. The fear was still there, but it was no longer paralyzing. Janet had made one crucial miscalculation when she'd decided to target me. She hadn't accounted for the strength that came from having people who knew me completely and would fight alongside me. My phone buzzed one more time. This message made my blood freeze. "By the way, I think you should know that I've been keeping detailed notes about your behavior around the office. See you bright and early." The message hung in the air between us like a toxic cloud. David leaned forward to read it, his jaw tightening as he processed Janet's words. Emma set down her coffee cup with more force than necessary. "Detailed notes about your behavior?" Emma repeated slowly. "She's really doubling down on this." I stared at the phone screen until the words blurred together. The calculated cruelty of the timing hit me harder than the threat itself. Janet knew exactly what she was doing, sending this right when I was probably trying to get some sleep before tomorrow's meeting. "She wants me scared," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "She wants me walking into that room tomorrow already defeated." David stood up abruptly and started pacing again, his earlier calm evaporating. "I can't stand this. The manipulation, the timing of that message, she's a predator." "Which means she's also gotten comfortable," Emma said thoughtfully. "Predators get sloppy when they think they have all the power." I found myself studying Janet's message again, but this time with different eyes. The fear was still there, gnawing at my stomach, but underneath it, something else was growing. Anger, maybe, or just exhaustion with being afraid. "You know what bothers me most?" I said suddenly. "It's not even the money anymore, or my job. It's that she looked me in the eye every day, knowing she was destroying my reputation. She probably enjoyed watching me get more and more anxious. That's what I've been trying to tell you, David said, stopping his pacing. This isn't about you not being good enough or making mistakes. This is about her being fundamentally broken as a person. Emma nodded. Normal people don't get satisfaction from watching their colleagues suffer. The fact that she's enjoying this tells you everything you need to know about her character versus yours. My phone felt heavy in my hands. I kept thinking about all the sleepless nights, all the times I'd questioned my own memory, wondered if I really had made some terrible mistake with the petty cash. The self-doubt had been eating away at me for weeks. I keep thinking about how I almost started believing her, I admitted. There were moments when I wondered if maybe I had forgotten about taking money out, or if I'd miscounted somewhere. She made me doubt my own reality. That's called gaslighting, Emma said gently. It's a classic manipulation tactic. The fact that you questioned yourself doesn't make you weak or gullible. It makes you human. David sat back down, his expression softening. Remember when we were kids and Emma convinced me I'd eaten the last piece of cake when I knew I hadn't? I was 8, Emma protested, but she was smiling slightly. You had me so turned around that I actually apologized to Mom for eating cake that you had obviously eaten, David continued. And that was just sibling nonsense. What Janet's doing to you is systematic and deliberate. The comparison made me laugh despite everything. Are you saying Janet has the emotional maturity of an 8-year-old? I'm saying she's using the same tactics, just with much higher stakes and much worse intentions, David replied. Emma's expression grew more serious. The important thing is that you recognize it now. Tomorrow, when she tries to twist things around or make you doubt yourself, you'll be ready for it. I thought about walking into that meeting room, facing Janet across a conference table, while she presented whatever fabricated evidence she'd constructed. The image still terrified me, but it no longer felt insurmountable. What if she really does have some kind of documentation? I asked. Fake or not, what if it looks convincing? Then you stick to the truth, Emma said firmly. You don't get defensive or try to over-explain. You state the facts simply and clearly, and you let her story fall apart under scrutiny. David leaned forward. And remember, she's not just trying to convince them you're guilty. She's trying to convince them that she's trustworthy. That's a much harder sell when someone is paying attention. The weight of tomorrow still pressed down on me, but it felt different now. Instead of walking into an ambush, I was walking into a confrontation I was prepared for. I want to practice, I said suddenly. I want to run through what I'm going to say, how I'm going to respond to her accusations. Emma and David exchanged another look, and I could see them both shift into planning mode. Okay, Emma said, settling back in her chair. Let's start with the basics. What exactly are you accused of, and what's your response? As we began working through my defense, I felt the last of my paralyzing fear transform into something more useful. Tomorrow would still be difficult, but I wouldn't be facing it alone or unprepared. Janet had underestimated what she was up against, and that might be the mistake that finally brought her down.